Good afternoon. It is March 21st and it's now 2 o'clock. I'd like to call the Community Impact Grants Committee meeting to order. Madam Clerk, if you take the roll, please.
Brenham.
Here.
Livingston. Here. Barron. Mackey.
Here.
English.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Great. Just for the record, Councilwoman Barron is on her way. She's running slightly late, but she is en route. Next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes from February 14th.
Chair.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? All right, Madam Clerk.
Brenham.
Yes.
Livingston.
Yes.
Mackey.
Yes.
English.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Next item is the adoption of the agenda. Do we have any additions or deletions? No? Have a motion for adoption?
Second.
Motion and a second. Madam Clerk?
Brenham.
Yes.
Livingston.
Yes.
Mackey.
Yes.
English.
Yes.
Motion approved.
And also, I missed this. I want to welcome Councilmember Terratio to our meeting. Thank you for joining us. Next item are items for discussion / action. Our grant funding amount for fiscal year 24 budget. And I believe we have, is she? I can't see the. Yes, okay, yes, Ms. Newton is online. So we have Councilwoman Newton joining us. And,
Yes.
okay, that's the only additional one. All right, items, grant funding amount for fiscal year 24 budget. And we have ACA Thomas available to walk us through a presentation. And just as a reminder from our last committee meeting, ultimately we looked at previous funding and kind of talked about historically what has been done in different categories. And the goal today, as we look at this, is to really focus in on an actual amount that we want to include in our upcoming budget. I think we all agreed and understood that the actual process of what the grant application looks like and deadline and timelines for submittal will come at a later date, but let's go ahead and be able to agree upon a funding amount so that we can plan for that accordingly as we begin our budget work sessions. So ACA Thomas, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, committee members, and other council members. Glad to have you here this afternoon. We'll start with the second page of the presentation that has the title Historical Funding Summaries. This actually just sort of restates the position that we talked about last month, only in a colored graph, with your blue dollars there being funding from general fund sources, and your orange stacks there being funds from the ARPA grants. Now, keep in mind that the reason that you have none in 19, 20, and 21 is that the ARPA grants have really only been available in fiscal year 22 and 23, and likely will this coming budget year will be the last year that those funds will be available simply because of spending requirements for those dollars. So I'll just wait a moment if there's any questions relative to this. If not, I'll move on to the next page that sort of breaks this down according to the category of funds. The first line item there is the lump sum amounts. These are items that are actually made by motion of council member either during the budget hearing, during the budget workshops, or during the motion period, or sometimes during the actual budget meetings. The next category is your ARPA funding. That just shows you the funding for those that were in that orange categories for the last 2 years. And then the last is actually your grant funds. These were actually your what you all referred to previously as discretionary grants. If you recall, back in 2019, it was $365,000 that was allocated in that pot of money. In 2021 and 22, that was lowered to $200,000. And this past year, we actually added an additional $300,000 when we actually renamed the committee the Community Impact Grant Committee and reallocated an additional $259,000 of the $300,000 that was actually moved to that category during the budget. I'll also indicate or point out to you that beside the grant funds, you see an asterisk there. That means that those were actually the only categories of funds that were competitively awarded in an application process.
And
Question. So,
Mr. Livingston, you recognize.
grant funds for that are the ones that the committee looked at that you're referring to?
Yes, sir. That was what was previously designated as the discretionary grants. And then the additional 300 was actually called Community Impact Grant. Yes, sir.
All right, ACA Thomas, and I think you said it, but I just want to make sure for the committee's sake that we're all clear. So these three categories, what ACA Thomas is saying, the last one, grant funds, is the only one that in previous years there was actually an application submitted on file and folks applied for funding and it was a competitive process. The lump sum was not that, and that the creation of the Community Impact Grants Committee was to be transparent and to create a process for these funds that are given out via grants. And so that had not previously been done with quote unquote lump sum allocations. The ARPA funds, of course, there are regulations behind it that we had to follow from the Treasury, but it was not necessarily Richland County's own application process. So just want to make sure we're all clear, kind of the breakdown. Right? And while they're joining us, Councilwoman Barron and Councilwoman Yvonne McBride, thank you.
Moving to the next page, I've actually sort of made some comparisons relative to our expenditures and some other benchmarks that give you an idea of the parameters of our contributions back into the committee. This goes back back into the community. This goes over the last 5 years from 2019 to 2024, and I'm including 24 in this just as a basis of comparison. So this takes our operating expenditures that are in our budget. This is not saying these are our total operating budget this year. This was just some numbers we were extrapolating for 2024 and what had been committed in prior years, how much that represents as a percentage of the county's total operating budget. So in 2019, there was $2.715 million that were allocated to groups back to the community through either lump sums or the discretionary process. That represented 1.54% of the county's total operating budget. In 2020, it was 1.3%. In 2021, 1.07%. 22, 1.05%. 23, 0.95%. And 24, if we were to use the same amount as used in 2023 from all sources of funds, it would be 0.92% if our expenditures were to be $205,000. Again, that's just an extrapolated number. We're not saying that's what our operating expenditures are going to be next year. We're just working off a presumption at the time that we did these slides. Any questions on that?
Mr. Livingston, you recognize.
And the number includes ARPA funds as well, any sorts of funding.
That's correct. That is correct.
Whether it's general fund, ARPA, whatever. Okay.
Yes, sir. Now, of course, 19, 20, and 21 were all general fund.
Okay.
The next slide shows you a the same summary based on the value of a mill. So in millage terms, the county collects 59.9 mills to operate the county operating budget or the county's overall budget. This does not include your special revenue funds or any of your enterprise funds. But that's the only tax revenue that actually goes toward running the general government. In 2019, the community partners received $2.715 million. The value of a mill was $1.565 million. That would have been 1.7 mills or 2.9% of the general fund millage. In 2020, that would go to 1.4 mills because the value of the mill of that year was $1.660 million and 2.4% of total collected millage. This goes on in 21 to be 1.2 mills as the millage value grows to 1.695 million and 1.9% of total millage revenue. In 23, it's the mill value is 1.780 mills. That goes to 1.1 mills of collection and 1.8% of total millage value. In 2024, under the same scenario, this would be 1 million or 1 mill at a millage value of 1.830 mills and a total percentage of the millage collections of 1.7%.
Thank you. And ACA Thomas, just can you give a reminder of how the value of the mill is set?
The value of the mill is set by the assessed ratio, the assessment ratio that of all taxable property in Richland County. So it's based on either a 4% millage calculation or a 6% calculation based upon what type of property it is. And we are limited in millage collections for several reasons, not the least of which being Act 388.
Thank you.
Questions?
Councilman Brennan, you recognize.
Thomas, would potentially another way to describe these two slides to be that the first one, as it relates to operating expenditures, it's a percentage of how much went out or was spent, and then the other is a percentage of what was collected?
Yes, sir. That's exactly the way it is.
Thank you.
I'll also point out that these were budgeted numbers, not actual numbers. So these were actually the budgets that were issued at that point in time. Okay. From that, we, part of the reason for being here today is to decide how much or how the council can decide or what you may be able to take the council as a recommendation for funding your partners in the community. There are a few things that I've looked around in the area to see if I could find some recommendations for how others might do it or what could be a good basis so that you could actually have a good budget number going into this. One would be a specific millage value. This would be very similar to the way that you fund your Conservation Commission, your economic development, which is just a transfer. It's not an added tax, it's just a transfer. But to determine how much millage value could be assigned to your community partners. A good example of that is at $1.83 million, if it were decided that we would like to allocate we would like to allocate the same thing that we do toward the economic development toward our community partners, then you would give a half of the $1.830 million, which would be roughly $915,000. So there can be some math derivative. I'm not saying that's what we're recommending. I'm just giving you an example of the math of how you would come back to that number. One thing that to keep in mind as well is that really you don't know what that final millage number is until October when everything comes back for the assessor. So it may be more prudent to consider looking at the previous year's millage value up to a capped amount, if that were the way the council or the committee would consider choosing to recommend this. The other is the other option that I pointed out, which would be a percentage of the prior year's general fund operating expenses. And I would recommend that if that were the case, it actually be the actual operating expenditures for the county. The reason I say that is, as you all recall, during the COVID years, we actually had a budget that was much larger for our general fund operations that year. because of the halt in the economy that happened in March, we actually had to, I was not here at the time, but the departments had to be asked to curtail their spending for that year. And as a result, we didn't spend as much as we budgeted on operating expenditures. That allows for you to make adjustments in unforeseen circumstances. So if you budgeted $200 million in expenditures and you wanted to give a percentage of that, but then for some reason we did not spend that much, then it would actually be based upon the prior year's expenditures, which would be calculated very shortly after the close of the fiscal year.
Thank you, ACA Thomas. So just I guess synopsis or to open this up for discussion with my colleagues. Based off of our last conversation, these are the kind of recommendations that staff has brought back for consideration for us to be able to select a dollar amount. And so the conversation or decision point right now is really the specific amount of money that we want to set aside in our budget to be able to allocate to our community partners. And then that is to have it in time as we begin our budget work sessions so that we know what we're looking at. And then our next committee meetings will be to actually discuss the timeline and application process once we agree upon the dollar amount. So I will open it up if anybody has any questions or any thoughts about the considerations presented. Mr. Livingston, you're recognized.
I like the idea of putting the funding by meal value. And one of the reasons for that is you have something that's very fixed. And also too, with the meal value, if you have a growth of CPI, you're going to have that attached to it every year. So you'll know that you can hold down and not increase the taxes on that because you're looking at the growth in CPI and it'll tell you exactly what number you need, not to have to worry about increasing. You may even increase the budget, but you don't have to increase the taxes if you got enough growth and CPI is high enough. So I think that number can give us, that can give us some control in terms of knowing exactly what we're expecting every year. Instead of a change in dollar amount of the meal makes sense to me.
Councilman Branham, I'm sorry, Councilman English, then Councilman Branham.
Thank you, ma'am. Just wanted to ask ACA Thomas to just kind of briefly describe the cap for those that don't understand.
A good for instance, let's say that we have a reassessment year and we may have 1 year of windfall. It could be that you wanted to say that we would fund to a certain millage value, not to exceed a certain amount, because in those years, many times those funds are used to actually catch up on capital improvements that may be necessary for the county. And then of course, in the following year, if you don't cap that, then what would happen is as your values start to level back off and your increases begin to become less and less, the funding opportunities for your partners become less and less as well.
Thank you. That was something we did. Apologies, but that's something we did with the library just about every year. And I wanted council members just to have a clear understanding of that. But I concur with Councilman Livingston, just always being able to go with that mill. So if it goes up, then the amount that we're able to budget can go up as well. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilman Branham.
So the prior year's millage value, that would be known well in advance of the budget process each year, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I mean, again, just to kind of say it out loud, I feel like we're thinking about this, or I feel like I should be thinking about this without any thought of having access to ARPA funds going forward. And the ARPA funds have been assigned to the coronavirus ad hoc committee.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Okay. I don't take the conversation too far down the road, but in reviewing the minutes, I appreciated again Councilman Livingston's comment about the fact that there might be some organizations that we should consider for recurring funds. kind of wondered how we might potentially fit that into the conversation. And are we going to, I guess, stipulate that whatever dollar amount we recommend is along with a, you know, again, a consideration or a recommendation that other, what was it called? Lump sum grants would not be a part of the general budgeting process? To hear from the rest of
Yeah, so I will say when we came up with the process of this committee, it was the intent that, like you said, all those organizations that received funding in the past, we would give a recommendation of how they would moving forward. So if this continuous funding, then that needs to come out of the committee to recommend the full council that, you know, whether it's X, Y, Z, these 4 organizations, yes, we want to provide continuous funding. We've set aside this amount of money. Like that would be a decision that would come out of our committee as a recommendation that we all agree upon, that that's kind of how we want to move forward. That would be separate from necessarily the grant per se process of different organizations applying for different programmings. Okay, you're welcome. I believe I saw, okay, I don't know which one. Okay, we'll go with Ms. Barron first, then we'll go with Ms. McBride.
Thank you, Ms. Becky. So I just, I wanted to at least speak officially on the record about the funds that we're speaking of. And I think that, you know, having some type of formula to award these grants are going to be critically important, because it does allow for us to have some transparency in our process. I also believe that reoccurring funds are critically important for those organizations who are staples in our community and staples in our county, who provide ongoing services regularly, routinely. However, I do believe that we should put some caveats to their funding, and that is not that it's necessarily rubber stamped, where we say, you know, you're going to always get these funds, but we do attach performance. We do attach some type of match or organizational buy-in, because in the past we've seen where organizations have solely depended upon the funds that come from the county for its existence. And I don't think that that's necessarily being good stewards of the county's funds. So just keeping, I want us, as we continue to have this discussion on how we move forward, I think that we keeping those things that we've already stated in mind, and also keeping in mind that a formula to fund is great. But when we look at the organizations that we are funding, we cannot put them all in the same basket, and to state that their evaluation would be the same. And I use the example of how we are proposing to monitor the ARP funds once they're awarded. We have already made a decision that it's our hopes that our third-party vendor would be able to, you know, if we have a smaller organization that needs additional support, that we've decided to fund them. So because we've decided to fund them, then we support them with the monitoring. And I think that very similar to as we look at looking at these community impact grants, that we also don't eliminate organizations who may not measure up to some of the bigger organizations that are here in the county. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Barron. I've definitely made notes of that. And, you know, I don't think, or at least I will definitely say it's not my intention to eliminate anybody from the process. I think today, definitely making sure we set aside the money so that we have it in the budget. And I definitely think there is going to be thorough conversation of what an actual application looks like, so we can include any and everybody, whether it's a small, you know, one-time program that's just in the summer or a larger program. I think you're right. It's open
to everybody. So I agree. Ms. McBride?
Yes, as a follow-up to the question regarding lump sums, there was no decision made in council meeting as to whether we would you hear me now? I know that there may be individuals who disagree with lump sum, but there are others that don't, and we all have our reasons for it. So a decision, Mr. Brown, was not made to eliminate lump summing. The other issue that I think is important, I agree with Mr. Living regarding using some funding basis, and the meals sound like it may be a good idea that we could look at that. This is sort of different from, actually, we're here to discuss how much we're going to budget, but in the process, it was mentioned about what procedures and how this new grant, I think it's called Community Impact Grant, should look in terms of funding. I think that we should be very, very careful, and I think we've sort of experienced this already this year in terms of how we select funds and in terms of totally using a discretionary process, because oftentimes the discretionary process is not an equitable process. And I think that we should put measures in place to ensure that all communities have the opportunity to participate and to receive these services. So many times underserved communities don't receive the services. And that was one advantage of the lump sum process. So in order to ensure that underserved communities and that there is geographical equity, I think we need to look at a process that ensures each district is able to receive a certain amount of funds to ensure that we actually are having community impact. I'm looking at some of the grants and I don't see them as really, for lack of a better term, I'm not going to see as I don't see them as community impact, but they're not impacting some of the communities that are in need. So that we are able to serve all constituents in Richland County and not just those that have good riders. I think we need to look at a process, as I said, that would include an allocation to districts to address their unique needs, yet that there be an application process to ensure that we follow all the guidelines. And so I think that may be something that needs to be addressed maybe at a later time during this committee meeting or during council meeting, since this is one that is supposed to be looking at the actual budget allocations.
Mr. Livingston?
Chair, what I would suggest is like we first just commit to an amount, but I think the next step for me would be to look at those extremely essential and important groups that we fund out of these funds, and follow up on what Ms. Barron was saying is we can do like what we already do with certain agencies now is we can establish some kind of agreement or with that particular organization in terms of what the deliverables and things of that particular nature. I mean, we have agreements with Central Midlands and other agencies and so forth. So we can do that since those will be the larger recipients of the funds. And then the funds that were remaining, we can do just as we did. I don't know what the lump sum before, however, but I just think that we need to take care of those that really have significant impact. And if they're not here, we'll be in trouble without those partners.
Well, I guess, Mr. Livingston, I think it would be good, and I don't know if you have a recommendation, but I think we need to all first agree upon what those organizations are. Because I think, the significant impact is relative in some people's opinion. So I think that I agree with what you're saying. I just think we have to, what organizations are those? Is it 3 of them? Is it 5 of them? Who are those organizations so that we all on the same page when we say?
Well, I just think staff or somebody just have to just pull the information on those organizations and talk about their contribution to our community, and we look at them and decide.
I just say one thing. I guess I think if we can give more detail to staff on what contribution to the community means to at least help them, that would be good, because I think they all do something that contributes to the community. But in order for staff to narrow them down, we either gonna have to tell them in order to determine that list. But Councilwoman McBride, you recognize?
Madam Chair, may I direct a question to Mr. Livingston?
Yes, ma'am.
There are certain community grants that we have funded for years and years. And those particular community grants usually have a countywide impact. So are you, and those I can understand because there's a countywide impact on those programs. But I want to again reiterate the need to address the unique needs of each district because they differ. But I do support the countywide impact, as well as making sure that we address the unique needs of each of our districts. Thank you.
Councilman Branham?
Just to the end of what we're talking about now, offhand, can the staff think of any examples that they would feel like by obligation or commitment, we have a recurring responsibility to provide funding to an organization?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Wright, you recognize?
I think by obligation, no, we aren't obligated to fund anybody. And that was one thing I kind of wanted to speak to, as well as that I don't want organizations to think that we are obligated, even the ones that have countywide impact, because still the county council has to vote on the budget and on who will be funded each year. So just because you got funds this year doesn't guarantee that you will get them next year. So I understand that there may be a certain likelihood that they may, but I don't want them to have the understanding that because they got funding one year that they are guaranteed funding for another year.
Councilman Branham, I will make sure that, sorry, Administrator Brown, go right ahead.
I apologize. The only thing that I would ask is, this is one of those areas we've talked about before where I don't want it to be individuals who have challenges with our staff and the decisions that the staff makes. There's been a number of comments that have been made about staff being biased towards individuals or organizations and being inconsistent with how they work with them. And so what I've asked throughout this process is we want to do what you would like as a body. And this particular funding mechanism is truly a council funding mechanism, and it does not generate or come from the staff. So whatever parameters or criteria you would like for us to place on a consideration, I think that's fair, but I don't think it would be fair to put staff in a position to communicate as if the staff chose what organizations are more impactful than others without the council at least providing criteria. Hopefully you feel like that's fair to you.
Yes, sir. Councilman Branham, was there anything else?
For fear of stating the obvious, I fully understand what we're trying to do here. And I think it's important that we have this conversation just so that we can know what the parameters are of the recommendation. Is it a recommendation kind of without qualifications or further explanation, or do we want to provide additional explanation and might be in the form of recommendations or things like that to provides earlier.
Councilman Bear? Okay.
So I would say that as a guidance to selecting these organizations, perhaps they can be aligned to our strategic plan. We have wrapping things around and aligning different other items with our strategic plan. And there may be some organizations that directly will help us connect with or help us further establish some of our strategic plans and some of our goals that we have to help push us through. So that, I'm just throwing out a thought because I agree with Mr. Brown that I don't necessarily want to put the staff in the first line of fire as a recommendation. but I think that we should probably, give some. So, whereas I'm just trying to help us get to the other side of this.
I appreciate that.
So,
I do think, I do understand, kind of the need to identify, some organizations. And I think, hearing Mr. Livingston and, Ms. Barron and Ms. Branham, Councilman Branham, I think that we're all hovering around the same thought process. But I do think we just need to look at the list and identify some of those. And so I don't mind looking at the list and identifying some of those and tying them to the strategic plan and then bringing them back to the committee for consideration to then give staff direction. Ms. Barron, was it?
So was that statement that you're going to provide that list, or would you like for each one of us to create a list and then have a consolidated list? So I'm just asking, you said.
I am completely fine with doing it, but if you all have one too, my thought was just bring a list back at our next committee meeting and then we all discuss
Okay,
it. But
got it. I wanted to be clear. I just wanted to be clear what the directives were, so that, if it's something I needed to do. So,
I could get us started. That's easier, and in that way,
I'll get a list. I just wanted to make sure that you were asking us to get a list, and then when we come back, we'll all have our list to kind of hash out.
Councilwoman Livingston, then Councilwoman Branham. McBride.
My thought was that perhaps each member of the committee, whoever, just submit any agency they think are essential or play a major role or should be considered in the group we're talking about, and submit those to staff, and staff compile all that. Because what happens is when you get that back, you may find every council member think this is one you ought to do. So to give you some guidance, right, from the beginning in terms of where you want to go.
That's great. If all the committee members would love to provide their list to staff before our next committee meeting, that would help us. And you feel free to throw out any names right now if you already have your list. So I think sorry, Ms. McBride, I forgot. Go ahead.
I was under the impression that we were looking at existing entities that we had already funded that were almost essential to the needs of Richland County.
Those are probably 99% of what I'd be looking at.
So I don't know whether it's appropriate at this time to bring in an external list. I'm not sure, because then we come into picking and choosing, and we got to have a really good process if we're just going to throw out some names. And so I sort of concur with Attorney Wright in terms of not actually maybe giving them some priority, but not saying that we're funding them because they're essential to the needs. So I think we need to be careful in that assumption that they are guaranteed or that they are the ones, because I think it could cause a lot of problems. So if we look at existing funding, I think that would be a start in addition to looking at the unique needs of the district, since it is a community impact grant. Thank you. What I'm saying is we've got the list to start with. And I think that nobody has to gather that list because the information we have it, and we can go back. I think Ms. Thomas has been back for years and years. So we have that as a starting point.
Correct. And that's exactly what I was thinking. I think everyone was thinking the same thing, to pull from that current list, to pull out the ones that folks believe are countywide or essential, that they think need to be quote unquote separate from the rest of the organization. I believe that's what everyone was going to pull from and provide those names so that we're then telling staff who those organizations are, because I don't want to assume that we all think they're the same organizations.
Okay, I just didn't think, I was under the impression that if we thought of other ones, we could.
No.
And that's
it's the ones that we've done for years and years that people believe.
To clarify that,
Yeah.
but I'm not excluding that.
So going back to the original item at hand, the funding amount, I heard Councilman Livingston give his thoughts towards sticking with the use of a mill as a recommended funding amount for fiscal year 24. Any other discussion related to using the mill as the recommended funding amount? Recognize Ms. Livingston.
Now, current year, our agencies are operating at a 1.1 mil, correct?
For fiscal year 2023. ACA Thomas, you recognize.
And the question, I'm raising that question because to see what it will be if you leave it at 1.1 mil, that's all.
Yes, sir, but keep in mind that did include quite a bit of ARPA dollars as well.
Right.
And that there will be ARPA dollars that will be allocated, while not in the budget process, through some of the COVID ad hoc committee grants.
Okay. Ms. McBride?
Yes, and as much as this is called a community impact grant, are we looking at the community grants for our neighborhood associations, or would that remain a separate process?
That would be a separate process that isn't included in this committee.
That is or
Is not.
So we, as a council, we have not decided to include that process as part of the community impact grants. The council is not.
I believe that that is actually part of the new development fund, or so they actually fund those from that source.
So we're only looking at general funds for
Yes,
this.
ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so I'm hearing mill value. Is there any recommendations related to the amount of the mill? Sorry, the percentage.
Ms. Mackey, would it help if I gave you some figures relative to our mill?
I don't know. Would that help the committee? Okay, yes. No.
So that might go the wrong way.
Yeah, no. No, you know, on this committee. ACA Thomas, you reckon?
Thank you, ma'am. The value of the mill currently is $1.830 million. One mill, of course, would be $1.830 million. 1/2 a mill would be $915,000. 3/4 of a mill is $1,372,500.
Did that help the committee? Councilman Brandon, you recognized.
So, Ms. Thomas, the last year of the community grants provided 1.1 of the 1 point came from ARPA money.
Last year, the ARPA dollars, just one moment, let me get back to that screen. The ARPA dollars actually represented $1.113 million, yes.
More than half.
Yes, sir.
All right. And then the year before that, without the ARPA money, just over $1 million.
Yes, sir.
And then fiscal year 23, without the ARPA money, 770,000. Okay. And then $500,000 would be 915,000.
That's correct, sir.
What would, can you give me below $500,000, a couple examples, like 1/4 or 3/5?
Okay, you're going to test my math ability here. If I'm doing it correctly, that would be $462,500.
For the record, 3/5 is larger than 1/2.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just gave you.
Me. I said 3/5.
I'm sorry.
Was less than 1/2.
Numbers here. I do carry a calculator with me everywhere I go.
About 3/8. That's less than half.
Okay, just 1 second, please. But that would be $686,250.
Thank you.
Oh, you good? Go ahead, Mr. Livingston. This is why we're here.
You know, and I'm gonna recommend one meal, and I want to speak to why. Now, unfortunately, we had some agencies, and I was kind of upset with them because they clearly said, gee, I sure wish I didn't have to have all opera funds. Don't give me opera funds, because they had a real concern, and that concern was, you've been funding me for the last 15 years. Now you're gonna give me opera funds. So when opera funds go away, you can tell me you don't have any more money. So I'd rather not have opera funds. So that's why I'm saying we need to keep it at 1 mil. So when those opera funds go, these agencies just can't go away. We have to raise the budget to make it happen.
So Councilman Livingston, I heard a recommendation. Was that a motion or was that just your recommendation?
No, I'll make a motion. We need a motion. Start 1 mil.
Second.
I have a motion and a second for using the value of 1 mil as the amount included in fiscal year 24 budget. Any discussion? So Branham, then Barron, then English.
With the recommendation again, just can we state what the parameters are, the recommendation? What is this money going to go? Going to go towards everything that was described as historical community funding, to include the stuff that was ARPA, lump sum and discretionary previously?
For additional money to ARPA, right?
Here.
I'd like to direct my question to ACA Thomas. Please remind me of the amount that would be awarded at 1 mil.
$1,830,000.
Pretty much what's being total awarded now, correct? Is what I was getting at, yeah.
Generally.
Okay, so then we have Ms. English, then Ms. Teresa. Ms. English, you recognize.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that this is up to, and those funds that are not spent go right back into the general fund. Is that correct?
That would be my desire.
Thank you.
What happens? Yeah.
Councilwoman Teresa.
Thank you all. Thank you, Madam Chair. So my question is just around the 1 mil amount. I'm curious as to, back in the olden days, let's just say a decent pre-COVID year, back in the olden days, what would have been the amount that would have been allocated in these lump sum grants, like just in a general, normal, everyday year, we're funding our normal groups and maybe there's a little left over? What would that have looked like?
Well, so hold on. So I think I would like you to be a little bit more specific for staff because, lump sums would come at the budget process. So there was no normal typical, how the process works. So are you asking them what was in discretionary or are you asking them what was?
That's related to my motion.
Mr. Livingston, having remembered the days before.
That's the whole idea of wanting to go by the meal value, because if the meal value go down, then these dollars go down too.
Mr. Ratio, did that answer your question?
More or less. One of the things I'm just concerned about is that, we have specific groups. I don't know if we're naming specific groups in this room or not, but the ones that we have, again, funded for maybe decades at a certain amount. And then we're funded in this last cycle from American Rescue Plan funds. If we're looking at ensuring those certain amounts, is this amount sufficient, or is this amount comparable to in the years past when we covered all of those organizations in those normal every year over year amounts, so that we don't have to try to hook or by crook to get funding for certain.
So the conversation, I guess, that we had earlier in the committee meeting was that each committee member and council members that are attending would look at the list of previously funded organizations and identify ones that they deemed to be, provide countywide impact, to be essential, or as you say, ones that have been given money for over 10 years, the ones that you feel should maybe be placed in a separate category to develop that list and then provide it so that we can discuss that at the next committee meeting of how do we have those versus the other. I think there's still discussions. I don't think any council member has said, let's continue to fund them in a certain amount. They just said, let's identify who they are so that we can then begin to have the discussion of what it looks like moving forward. And then we all can agree who those organizations are.
Okay, great. And then that can get just as a practical matter, that could get emailed to you, Madam Chair?
Sure.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
You're welcome. Ms. McBride, you're recognized.
So follow up with Mr. Ratio's question. The lump sum process would include the amount of funding include some of those so-called essential projects. For those of you that were not here during the lump sum process. So those projects, some of the big projects, we did it through lump sum. So those are general funds, lump sum are general funds. So I think that budget-wise, we could look at how much general funds we spent prior to COVID in terms of funding projects. Is that not right, Ms. Thomas, in terms of finding the amount of funds?
The listings are there for the prior years. And if the chair and committee will beg my pardon as I say this, in some of these years where these groups were funded at these levels, there were other essential functions, there were other county projects that were deferred. So I would ask that everyone please keep that in mind as well.
I will like to, I'm sorry, Mr. Bride, were you done?
Yeah, because that's part of my question. I'm still following up.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, but we're not talking about why they were deferred. We're looking at the cost of the budgetary amount. That's what's important. And I know that there are staff persons that don't like lump summing, but right now this is a council issue and we're discussing all aspects of it.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I do want to recognize Councilwoman Newton, who's online. So let me allow her an opportunity to speak, and then Administrator Brown. Councilwoman Newton?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So I had a different point, but have a comment about what Ms. Thomas just said, or maybe it's a question. I guess it's a comment. As we look at what the amount's going to be, whether it's a mill or not, and we look at previous year history, there were some years, I would rather have Ms. Thomas correct me on my language, but there were some years where we dug extra deep into our coffers to provide the lump sum. And I don't want to use the wrong budgetary language. And so I want to make sure that we are, like everybody does, using whatever the best fiscal practices are so that we are not borrowing from, Peter to pay Paul, so to speak. I think the mill number sounds like that probably, puts us in safe stead. But just as we're looking at what the numbers for the previous years are, there might be a point where we request information from administration to understand what the implications were from some of those years where we had higher numbers. My question, though, and it's not a question that I expect to be answered now, but I am curious about the lump sum. I know that when we modified our budgeting process last year, that it changed how we dealt with lump sum. And so I would just like some research to clarify, did we vote to eliminate lump sum? Did we not vote to eliminate lump sum? Did we ignore it altogether and do something else? I just want to understand what actions we took as a body. So that's a request that I have for the future. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Newton. Administrator Brown.
Just very briefly, and I think to Ms. McBride and ACA Thomas's discussion, this is the reason why it's very important that you don't necessarily have the administrator make the decision, because I have to look at county operations as a whole, which includes anything that you want and then requests that I get. And I can certainly communicate to you that there have been previous requests that have not been answered, and county operations do have a question as to how was that decision made when we know that these requirements also need to be met. So that's, as a partnership in this conversation, that's why I say what I said earlier, as from a council to an administrator, you really want to communicate what you want to have happen, because from a funding standpoint, as I showed you in the previous council meeting, the requests that we receive are in the millions from staff. So you should just kind of keep all of that in mind when we're having the larger discussion, please.
Thank you, Ms. Okay, I just want to say one. So thank you, Mr. Brown. I appreciate that. And I do hope that the committee understands the messaging here, that it is up to us to make the decision so that there aren't any implications on staff that they're choosing favorites, that this really is a true council decision. So I would ask that we continue to make sure that we are providing the direction. And of course, if there's anything that is incorrect or illegal, I'm sure Attorney Wright will stop us before we go too far. Ms. McBride?
I know that on the councils that I've served on, Richland County Council, that they have been fiscally responsible. I also know that prior to, we looked at having a certain amount of reserved. I can't remember what it was, 19% or 21%. We never went over that amount that was required. So I just don't want it to be miscommunicated that we did, because I know that we did not. And I also know that during the discussion, because I was very involved in it, we did not make a decision on the lump sum. I'm 100% sure.
All right, so we are in there's a motion and a second on the floor related to a value of $1 million being allocated for the recommended budget amount for fiscal year 24. We had a motion and a second. We're in discussion. Is there any other discussion? Everybody good? Mr. Branham.
I just again want to confirm the other terms of the motion that related to.
Councilman Livingston, can you clarify your motion with your terms?
It's just to allocate $1 million for the Community Impact Grant Fund.
To include.
Question is, is this to include items that were previously considered discretionary and items previously labeled as lump sum?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Madam Clerk, would you call the vote, please?
Branham,
No.
Livingston,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
English.
Yes.
Motion approved.
All right. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Branham,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
English.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to call the Rules and Appointment Committee to order for March the 21st, 2023. Ms. Carrillo, if you will, please call the roll.
Brenham. Teratio. Barron.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Our next order of business is approval of minutes from March the 7th. You can find those items on pages 7 through 10. I'll entertain a motion, or if you have any, if you have any changes, are there any changes that need to be made? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve the minutes, sorry.
Second, Ms. Carrillo, if you'll call for the vote.
Brenham.
Yes.
Teratio.
Yes.
Barron.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge Mr. Brandon, who has joined us, as well as Ms. English, who is here with us. Our next order of business is the adoption of the agenda. Ms. Carrillo, do we have any changes or modifications that need to take place?
Not at this time.
I'll entertain a motion to accept the agenda.
Move to adopt the agenda.
Second. Carrillo, if you'll call for the vote, please.
Brenham.
Yes.
Teratio.
Yes.
Barron.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Well, our next order of business is interviews. So we'll need to go into executive session momentarily to do interviews, and during executive session, we will interview for the Board of Zoning Appeals, which has 4 vacancies, but we have 2 applicants that we will interview. Then we'll also go into executive session to conduct interviews for the township with 1 vacancy, and we have 2 applicants. I'll entertain a motion to go into executive session to conduct interviews.
Move to go into executive session.
Second.
Carrillo?
Brenham.
Yes.
Teratio.
Yes.
Barron.
Yes.
Motion approved.
not take any action. However, we did do interviews for the Board of Zoning Appeals and the Township. I'll entertain a motion to come out of executive session.
So moved, Madam Chair.
Second.
Ms. Carrillo?
Brenham,
Yes.
Teratio, Barron.
Yes.
Motion approved.
The next order of business is to make our appointments. We'll start with the Board of Zoning and Appeals, which has 4 vacancies. Please note that we do have one candidate, which is 5A1, Sheila Harris, who was interviewed in December. The rest of the applicants we interviewed today, we can take them one by one, or we can make a blanket recommendation.
Madam Chair, so for our appointments for 5A, I guess I have a question regarding one of the applicants.
Sure.
Okay, so Ms. Harris, it looks like interviewed for several positions. And I don't remember that interview. Did you have any notes or remember if she had a strong preference, or if there was a position that she probably was a best fit for?
So I did have an opportunity to take a look at my notes before coming here, but I did not bring them with me. But she did have a recommendation of another board that she would be better suited for. So if that, to answer your question.
Okay, thank you so much. I guess I would be prepared to move that we would appoint Mr. John Stanley Panford to the Board of Zoning Appeals to fill 2 of the 4 vacancies.
There a second?
Appreciate the applicants being here and their willingness. If I could just make a statement.
I could second and have some discussion, or you cannot make a second.
I will not make a second.
Then the motion will die for lack of second.
So now I'll open up for more discussion. Mr. Brandon?
Thank you to the applicants for being here today. I think there's an opportunity there for them to study up a little bit more on the purpose of the Board of Zoning Appeals. And as such, I would just move for a re-advertisement of those positions.
Be clear, your motion is to re-advertise for the Board of Zoning and Appeals for those 4 vacancies.
That's right.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion?
I guess my discussion is just curiosity around, have we had difficulty attracting applicants to this board? And is there maybe something we could do to help bring forward some applicants that are a little more well-versed in what the board does and are a little more familiar with its actions?
So historically, we have not had a large pool of applicants for this board. However, this is one of those boards that we had to catch up with the vacancies. And so now we're caught up with the vacancies, and here we are with 4, and these are the applicants that we received. And so in the past applications that we've had, it was clear about what the expectations were. I am concerned about the individuals that, or it brings me pause to just rubber stamp people because they have an interest to serve. And so because of that, that's why I fully support us re-advertising. I think this committee has done an excellent job in catching up, and I feel okay and feel comfortable with us re-advertising for 4 more because we are getting ready to do that anyway, and we'll just add them on to those. And perhaps as we look forward, as we move forward with that, we can reach out to the staff and, just perhaps get some help from them as to, you know, how we can mill through. So yeah.
Thank you so much.
Any further discussion? Ms. Carrillo?
Brenham,
Yes.
Teratio,
Yes.
Barron.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you. Our next appointment is for the Township Auditorium. We had several applicants who interviewed in the past, and they interviewed as far back as July. I will say that, and just before we make a recommendation, just give you some heads up. There are some applicants who had multiple applications here. And of my recollection, I don't have one that is burning and jumping out at me because there were multiples there. So I know I'm no help, but given that we have one appointment, I think we might be all right.
I would move to reappoint Mr. Carlos Gibbons Jr.
Second.
Discussion, and I would also like to recognize Ms. English, who's joined us. No discussion? Ms. Carrillo?
Brenham,
Yes.
Teratio,
Yes.
Barron.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you. Items for discussion. We've got several items here. I'm looking at time, make sure we're good. So we have several items here for our discussion that were left by my predecessor, Mr. Bill Malinowski, and some of which I had the privilege of help craft these for him. So I did take them on with him, but just noting that first item for discussion, and then what we can do is determine after we discuss each item, how we want to move forward with these items or not. Item 6A, prior to the Rules and Appointment Committee interviewing applicants to serve on existing vacancies, council members serving as liaisons on a board, commission, or committee should provide the Rules and Appointment Committee with an update on current needs that particular boards is trying to fill, including but not limited to qualifications, expectations. The council members should make every effort to attend those interviews. So this is just a mere recommendation. This is one that we started putting in good practice over the last couple of years. And we've updated prior to last year, we took the opportunity to update our, our overview, the overview of every board, commission, and committee. So they're standard. They are, they're uniform. So we have any qualifications, recommendations, things of that nature. The one thing that we can I believe this is just an item that we can, just again, do as a good practice, and to ask, the clerk's office as we look at interviews and aligning and appointments, to make sure that we reach out to the liaisons, council liaisons, to see if they have any updates for us. And then we can invite them to the meetings, but that goes without saying, all of our interviews are open. Any further discussion about this item?
Madam Chair.
Recognize Ms. Teratio.
As someone who has served as liaison to a lot of our entities, I would just also state that it's not just the liaison that we would want to communicate with regarding the qualifications and expectations. We want to communicate with perhaps the chair of that board or commission, and also the director, whatever role is serving as the executive director kind of function of that organization. So that's all I would just add to that. I have definitely spent a lot of years not being on this committee, but attending it because I have served as liaison. So I think that's a good practice for us to abide by.
Thank you, Ms. Teresa, and that's one that we've also adopted. It's not captured here, but definitely we can include for in the language. But it is something that we have started to do and have caught lots of snafus along the way, and then some of which we didn't catch or they didn't catch. We reached out and they didn't respond back to us, and sometimes creates challenges for us. But I would like to take this opportunity to commend the clerk's office for really sharpening their tools with addressing the needs that this committee has had and concerns that they've had in making sure that we get the information that we need from the commissions and the boards, as well as from the applicants. So thank you. The next item, 6B, the mission.
Sure.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. I thank you to Ms. Horatio. Totally agree. And it sounds like the chair does as well, just to reach out to the chair or other leader of the commission, the board, what have you. And I would just add to potentially that, just to be very clear, I know the word should is there, which is great, and failure to get that information, to have like a chair or a council liaison respond would not to proceeding with. Would this be something that we would be recommending that council as a whole adopt as a policy, like to take a vote on?
You can, but as a chair, I just think that because we have already adopted this as somewhat as a practice amongst this committee and with the clerk's office, it's this body's determination whether or not you want to go officially on the record with this, with this practice that's already in place. So all of these are items that we can discuss or move for action to take to full council.
Okay. Yeah, I feel very confident that the council, would be receptive and work with us as much as we asked them to when we make outreach. Maybe any sort of formalization is not necessary, and in which case I would just say I agree 100%.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
Will this just be reported out as part of our report, but no action need to be taken?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Next item, 6B, the mission and vision of each board, committee, commission, Richland County Council appoints shall be listed and made available to all. Again, this is one of those items that we've already, it's included on our website. It is included as a part of our application process. The clerk's office also, when they invite individuals to interviews, they also send the applicant an overview of what they're coming to interview for. What that same snippet that's available online, they get it again. So it's always a little concerning when they come to these interviews and they don't know what they're interviewing for, because like we told you and we told you and we told you again. So again, I'll open it up for any discussion for that item, but this is another practice that we've already put into play.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, I don't think I even knew that it was on our website. Hopefully, as we revamp our website, all of this is much more navigable to the general public.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that I think the first year being on this committee, we spent with previous clerk as well as our current clerk working to make our application. When we made our application digital, then it's more user-friendly. It has more information. So I think that perhaps in the report out, I'd be glad to share with council to remind them of the updated system and what can be found there. That's a very good point, Ms. Horatio. Because if you don't know, then you don't know what to tell. You don't have the information to share with those individuals you may come across in the county. Anything further? You have something, Mr. Brown?
Thank you. I would just say, in my experience serving on the Board of Zoning Appeals and Planning Commission previously, it was pretty straightforward. We may have some challenges with our website, but it was pretty straightforward as to how to land on. website, and I'm very grateful that the purpose or the mission of each of those bodies is there.
Anything further? At 6C, eliminate the requirement for applicants who are applying to serve on boards, committees, and commissions to disclose their age range of sex during the application process. Appointments are done based upon skills and knowledge. I'll entertain any discussion about that. I could lots of commentary I could give and do my Bill Malinowski voice all for about 50 minutes on this one, but I won't. So I'll open it up.
I will say that I have gotten feedback from people who, for whom we appoint people, and they do find it helpful. They are actively looking to ensure that it's not just, one demographic on their committee or commission or board. In fact, I had one of the people who was appointed to a board approach me about, he said, hey, everybody on this board looks just like me. So he's like, that's probably not great when we're voting to do the kind of work that we do. So I think that the only feedback that I've gotten about it really is that folks would maybe even want more information about kind of identifying factors. And I know one of the things that I personally would kind of like to see is when we have people come in, we're pretty formal. We address them as Miss or Mr. or whatever. If folks would rather be addressed in a different way, I'd like for us to have a way to identify that as well. So that we're really honoring everyone and how they want to be recognized and presented to the world.
So with that, I want to kind of hinge up. You don't have a problem with the age. You don't have a problem with the sex. So do you want to add in here pronouns or sexual preference? How do you want to address that?
So I think we could put, it's very common now to see forms include pronouns, and it's very common to have a place to check off if you want to be addressed as Miss or Mr. or something different. And I think there are plenty of examples out there on forms that we could pull from and probably look at other counties' applications and just see what is how it's being presented, even if it's just a fillable form or something. So I think that's something that could be helpful as we move forward.
Okay, so this is indeed one of those items that it would be an action item that we would need to send to full council. So with that, what I've written down is I just put I said their age, sex, and then comma, sexual preference to include.
I think if we just had, I think generally what I have seen on other forms is just, like maybe continue with an age range, have a gender. You could do gender, or you could do gender and or pronouns, or the, I'm forgetting the word that you use. The salutation, not the salutation. It's the Miss or Mr. What do you call that? I'm losing the word. Title. Yes, thank you. Yes, if you are doctor or whatever it is, that we would have that, and and maybe even explore other just what other people have as identifiers on some of these forms. I wouldn't want to go too far down a rabbit hole. I don't want to have to get people's blood types or anything, but but just get some more identifying factors so that we can see those in the applications.
Brandon?
I just feel like the flip side, at least of the age and the sex identification thing, is if we're committed already to interviewing every applicant, then I guess, at least in theory, we don't have a risk of discriminating against someone on those bases. So, spirit of trying to appoint people based on skills, knowledge, the interview experience, I could see where maybe we would be open to eliminating them on the app.
And I will say that I don't know of any instance where we choose not to interview someone. I think it is our practice to interview anyone who applies. So you're absolutely right in that point, that we would not. I'm just speaking for myself. I would love to know how to address people correctly. That's mainly where I'd like to get to.
So if it is the will of this body to move item 6C forward to full council in any form of recommendation, it would have to be so by a motion. So at this point, it could mirror what is before us, or it could be something different.
I would move that we move this to full council without a specific recommendation. We can do that as well, and then let the body. Can't we do that? We can't. No. Okay.
Your motion has to be specific.
So we would.
We could move this item and I report out on it without a recommendation. I can report out on it without a recommendation, and then present it to council. And if they chose to make a motion at that time, then they could.
That's right. That's what I'm suggesting. I'm sorry, I didn't articulate that well.
Okay. Given that, you good, Ms. Carrillo? Okay. And so given that, we'll move to item 6D, request all boards, committees, and commissions whose members are appointed by Richland County Council to be reevaluate the number of members they need to serve on the particular entity in order to address their need for reduction or increase the number to be appointed and served. So essentially what this one says is that we should request our all the entities that we interview for to make sure that they have enough people to serve. Like, so if they have if a committee says 12, then they may come back and say, hey, 12 is not enough. Then they can come back to us. And then as a committee, we can send it to full council and make a recommendation. That's what this is stating. I think this could be, again, a practice because it gets hairy because we're talking about changing ordinances. So, this could be a practice where we just as a part of maybe even our evaluation or our monthly report, we could just ask them, add a question to that, any recommendations or such from that you'd like to submit to the committee. Ms. Carrillo.
Thank you. One of the things that I do want to bring up to the committee is that some of these boards are appointed by state. So we have no regulations on how many members they can add or take. So since they've been those numbers have been already assigned by state law, then we have to follow those. So I just want to keep that under consideration that some of those boards and commissions, we don't have jurisdiction to change the amount of members that are serving.
Correct. And I think this one is specifically to the ones that we've created by ordinance. Mr. Brandon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're running very short on time, and I do have some thoughts on this, and as such, I wanted to move to defer it to the next meeting.
That is non-debatable. So we will we need to take a vote, Ms. Carrillo, to defer this? Okay.
Do you need a second to defer?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll second the to defer.
Any further? There's no discussion. Go ahead.
Brenham,
Yes.
Teratio,
Yes.
Barron.
Yes.
Motion approved.
And given the time and the next committee meeting, I'll entertain a motion.
Adjourn.
Second.
Ms. Carrillo?
Brenham,
Yes.
Teratio,
Yes.
Barron.
Yes.
Motion approved to adjourn.
Thank you.